Hello, everybody. This is Scott Bunce, and today I'm here with Luke Carlson. Luke has spoke at one of my Vistage meetings, and it was just a great speech about strength training. And I'm telling you, since the meeting, many of the members continually reference how they have to exercise differently based on your speech to greatly improve. But instead of me talking about it, Luke, can you give us a little bit more about your message and how you're suggesting we work differently?
Yeah, Scott, thank you for having me. I would love to comment on it for sure. So we recognize that as executives, we have to take time to sharpen the saw, meaning we just have to step back away from the work and we have to go to work on ourselves. Now, I'm a longtime Vistage member myself. I recognize that Vistage is the embodiment of that concept, the idea that you take time away from the work just to go to work on yourself so that when you throw yourself back into the work, into the organization, you're able to create that much more value. So Vistage represent this concept, sharpen the saw, popularized by Stephen Covey. It was Covey's 7th habit of his 7 habits of highly effective people. Well, maybe the best way that we can go about sharpening the saw robustly is our exercise. And if that's the case, if our exercise is that important, then we should probably find a way to do it in a more intelligent manner. So I think we are societally pro-exercise. People are exercising. Our executives are engaged in exercise. But what we find out is there's a massive chasm between how people exercise and what the preponderance of scientific research has uncovered about how we should exercise. And my presentations try to bridge that gap. How do we take all this scientific research and make it really practical for a busy executive that understands I should be exercising, but how do we actually get more out of our exercise? And so I'd love to go through a few of those key take-home messages, if that's appropriate, Scott.
Absolutely. Dive in, and then if you don't cover them in this video, I'll actually bring up a couple that I remember of your speech and tell you how I've tried to put it into practice. But go ahead, please.
Fantastic. So I think the first key take-home message is we probably don't need to do near as much exercise as we had always been led to believe. Instead of doing more exercise, we should probably focus on more intense exercise. Now, intense, when it comes to cardio, means have your heart rate higher. And we can do this with interval training, or we can do this with steady state training. So instead of saying, I got to be on the elliptical, I got to be on the treadmill for an hour, we could probably get the job done in 15 minutes or 20 minutes with a little bit of a warm up and then working at a much higher level of intensity or a higher heart rate. It turns out that it's that intensity that drives what we call our VO2 max. And our VO2 max is just a scientific term for our aerobic capacity, our aerobic conditioning. And that's what's so strongly correlated with the prevention of death from all causes. So if we want to become healthier, our first calling is not to lose weight, for example. And losing weight is great, but we're much better off becoming aerobically fit than simply losing weight. Mm-hmm. So the second definition of intensity, okay, working harder, but for a shorter period of time, is when we strength train, we probably only need to strength train maybe twice per week, doing about 8 to 10 exercises. But we need to do those exercises at a higher level of intensity. Well, what does that mean for strength training? It means we push to the point of what's called momentary muscle failure, just the point where we can't do another repetition. So what do we always do? We used to do 3 sets of 10 repetitions. Mm-hmm. Well, the new research says we could do just 1 set and forget 10 repetitions, just go until you can't do another perfect repetition. So maybe that's 7, maybe it's 17, maybe it's 27. The number is not magical. As long as we get to the point where we're stuck and we can't do another one, that's the key. So from an aerobic standpoint, a cardio standpoint, and from a strength training standpoint, we can work out harder, but work out far less often. I think that's our first key take-home message from the scientific research.
Well, that's interesting because I grew up at a much younger day doing 10K races, right?
Yeah.
I ran one marathon, but at one point I was doing a lot of 10Ks. And of course, my goal when I started running was to get into the runner's high. And the runner's high, I'm not pushing myself to the point where it's failure. And it's for long periods of time, which points out that my early training was all for naught. So thank you for that, debunking everything I did as a younger man.
Yeah, and the idea that we have to run longer, right, is a notion that probably is influenced by the sport of long distance running. Like if you're going to train for a marathon, you got to run a long distance. But there's a difference between sport and exercise that's actually designed to improve our physiology, to prevent chronic disease. And so I like to be clear in my message that we're trying to prevent chronic disease. We're trying to sharpen the saw. We're trying to actually become healthier human beings. We're trying to improve our performances as executives. And we just don't need a tremendous amount of exercise to do that. Now, the second key take-home message from a strength training standpoint is that in order to make the strength training safe, we should probably strength train slowly, meaning we lift the weight slowly. We lift it under control, and then we lower the weight slowly. The mistake most of us have made when we strength train is we throw the weight up and then we let it drop. By lifting it slower and lowering it even slower, we eliminate momentum and we put more tension on our muscle. So this is better for our muscle, and it's so much better for our joints as well.
Yeah, that was the one key thing that the members of my group talked about several times after you presented. I'm meeting my exercise goal and I'm slowing down as I'm lowering the weight. And several people talked about that slow down as they're lowering their dumbbell or whatever they're lifting. And so your message got through to my group loud and clear.
Yeah, that point is so important. When we lift a weight, that's valuable. When we lower the weight, it's even more valuable. So to get more value from the lowering of the weight, we just have to go slower on the way down. So maybe you lift it for 2 to 3 seconds and you lower it for 4 to 5 seconds. If you walk into most gyms, you won't see that happening. People tend to drop the weight, which is worse for our results and definitely worse from a safety standpoint.
Right. And let's face it, the older we get as executives, staying safe becomes that much more important.
Yeah, we want our strength training to be therapeutic. The strength training should be our remedy for the joint issues and the arthritic joints that we're experiencing. And the strength training can become therapeutic if we move slowly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I play tennis, and I've passed my days where I can play singles. So I do play doubles. And now I'm starting to think when I go 3 sets, maybe that's much too long to exercise. I still have playing tennis, but yeah. But here's what I've noticed is some of the strength training that you've done has allowed me to improve my tennis playing, even though it's long spurts of aerobic as opposed to short spurts and to failure. I can tell the other things I'm doing are leading to better tennis along the way.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's maybe a great third kind of topic for us, Scott, is the benefits of strength training. We are most exercisers are largely unaware of how robust the benefits are. We have a great body of research that says strength training is the most important way for us to drive improvements in our cognitive function to ward off what's called mild cognitive decline, the precursor to mild cognitive impairment. It's the idea that we slow down as we age. Strength training is the most effective way to reverse that. And I've yet to meet very many executives that say, I got to strength train because I'm compensated at a high level to make decisions for this organization. Well, that is an evidence-based statement. We know that strength training drives working memory. We know that strength training lowers our resting blood pressure. Strength training, of course, improves our bone mineral health. Strength training wards off cardiovascular disease and stroke. And we normally thought that we just do cardio for our cardiovascular systems. We now know that strength training of muscle failure is just as effective as cardio for warding off cardiovascular disease risk. So our summary statement there is the benefits, the saw sharpening benefits are more robust than even the avid exerciser ever assumed. So that's really positive news. We're getting more out of our strength training, so much more than stronger muscles or bigger muscles, which of course is what we thought in the 70s and 80s and the 90s. The research now says no, strength training is more about driving medical benefit than it is about getting bigger muscles. That's the key takeaway.
Yeah, I think the idea of a key executive, they get to a point in their life where their brain becomes their most important tool, which is very different than what they were in a younger period. And
100%.
young executives trying to get ahead, working untold number of hours and not taking time to sharpen the saw, like you said, will actually be a detriment as opposed to a benefit as time goes on.
100%, Scott. Amen.
So what else can you tell us about maybe some tips along the way of what we should be doing to get the most out of strength training? And I don't know, maybe you've got an anecdote from your career that you'd love to share with us.
Well, I'll give you a summary statement, and I'll try to keep it short because my voice, if you haven't noticed, is almost gone. So what we find is that a high-level executive can strength train not too dissimilarly from a professional athlete. So what I recommend for our executives is very similar to what I used as an approach when I was a strength and conditioning coach in the NFL. And that's 2 workouts per week, 10 to 12 exercises, 1 set of each exercise, a goal of 8 to 12 repetitions, but really going to the point of momentary muscle failure. So that's strength training. That would be about 2 30-minute workouts per week. And then doing 1 to 2 higher level of intensity interval type workouts for the cardiovascular system, added cardiovascular benefit. That lays the foundation of a great exercise prescription for a time-starved executive. Now, if you want to layer in some tennis, right? If you want to train for a 5K and race a 5K, that's great. But don't let it get in the way of that foundation of 2 strength training workouts per week and 1 to 2 higher intensity cardio sessions per week.
Love it. Well, who knew that you were taking your voice to failure as some type of strength training? Obviously, I'm joking, but thank you for spending some time with us today. Now, I know people are going to be really interested to hear and learn more about what you do. How do they contact you, and what's the best way to interact?
Yeah, Scott, thanks for asking. They can always email me at luke@discoverstrength.com, or of course, they can check out our website, discoverstrength.com.
Luke, thanks again for sharing your time and thoughts with us today. Wishing you all the best.
Scott, it is my pleasure. Thanks for having me.